It was a warm, quiet night in Los Angeles. For once, everything was still and serene in the otherwise busy town. But this silence and peace couldn't last forever. One LA resident was soon awoken by a loud banging sound. Considering it was the middle of the night, he was confused, so he got up and headed outside to see what was going on. As he looked in the direction of the noise, he saw a young woman hit the ground. He peered into the distance and saw a man making a run for it. The man stood frozen stiff by what he had just seen. And as the woman gazed in the direction of the running man, she could only utter one word. Why? Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. So if you're interested in good old-fashioned true crime without a bunch of AI nonsense, you've come to the right place. So be sure to hit that subscribe button. It's totally free and just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. Rebecca Schaeffer moved to New York in hopes of becoming a supermodel. But fate had something else in store for her. One cover shoot for 17 magazine changed Rebecca's life, and the next thing she knew, she forgot all about modeling and was now starring in a popular comedy series called My Sister Sam. It all happened so fast that it honestly made her head spin, but Rebecca knew that she was on the path to success, and she was running headfirst into whatever the Hollywood scene had to offer. From here, things were on the up and up. Rebecca bagged various supporting roles in television films, feature films, and TV series, and she was on her way to becoming a star. With fame, though, came a lot of fans and a truckload of admirers. Anyone and everyone wanted Rebecca's autograph, or a response to one of the many fan letters that had been mailed to her. And Rebecca truly loved writing back to her fans. It was because of their love and support, combined with Rebecca's determination and hard work, that she was where she was in the first place. And she loved giving back to them, even if only in some small way. Rebecca received letters from everyone. While most of them were uplifting and put a smile on her face, well, some weren't so nice. That is sadly what happens when someone gets famous. They get attention of all kinds, and not everything is camera shutters, blinding lights, and expensive dresses on a red carpet. And Rebecca was about to find this out the hard way. There was someone out there who was obsessed with Rebecca, but she had no idea just how deep this obsession ran. No one imagined or even thought in their wildest dreams that Rebecca's stalker would take things to the next level, like visiting her workplace and finding out where she lived. But they did. On July 18, 1989, a quiet and peaceful Los Angeles neighborhood was jolted by a deafening banging sound. A neighbor decided to check things out, and as he went outside and looked in the direction from which the noise was heard, he stopped in his tracks. On the ground by the entrance of an apartment complex lay a woman who was clearly injured and in distress. In the distance, a man in a yellow shirt was seen making a run for it. The young woman was still alive, and she was repeatedly heard saying one word: why? The neighbor called emergency services, and within minutes the young woman was loaded into an ambulance and taken to the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Her condition was getting critical by the minute. She was losing consciousness, and for the doctors, things were not looking good. Tragically, the woman would lose her life within 30 minutes of reaching the hospital due to a severe chest injury. But who was this woman anyway? Well, she was up-and-coming actress, 21-year-old Rebecca Schaeffer. And at the time of her passing, she had just secured a major role in The Godfather 3, and she was over the moon about this role. It was very likely to be her big breakout moment. But she wouldn't get to perform this role because someone had evil intentions in mind, and her whole life as a promising actress was blown to painful shreds without a moment's notice. No one could have guessed that such a bright, vibrant young actress could lose her life so young. To her family, it seemed like only yesterday that she was in diapers babbling about who knows what to her parents, Dana and Benson. Her family had been living in Eugene, Oregon, and Dana worked as a writer at Willamette University, whereas Benson was a child psychologist. Rebecca was the couple's only child, and the Schaeffers were a devout Jewish family, and they were all very close. The family eventually moved to Portland, where Rebecca went to school and eventually discovered her love of modeling, and later, acting. Belonging to a Jewish family, Rebecca initially wanted to become a rabbi, but she always had been fond of acting. Well, fate had something else in store for her, and it wasn't until she was 14 that she realized that her true calling was to become an entertainer. She caught the eye of some modeling agencies when she was in high school, and as soon as Rebecca stepped into this niche, it was as if her world finally came to life. Rebecca wanted to be a star. She was fond of modeling and acting, and she actually had begun her career with a few modeling gigs for department store catalogs and commercials, and even landed a few roles as an extra in a television film. But living in Oregon limited Rebecca from discovering her potential and bagging bigger opportunities. So in 1984, when she was 16, she decided to move to New York City. And there she worked with Elite Model Management, a modeling agency for aspiring models. After spending the summer in New York, Rebecca decided to stay and pursue her dream of becoming a model, and her parents were right behind her decision. They wanted Rebecca to be happy and to do what she wanted to do, so they let her stay in the Big Apple, spread her wings, and improve her craft. Now, Rebecca was in a vast city with tons of opportunities, but that also meant she didn't know anyone there, and to add to that, she was also strapped for cash, so she lived with a bunch of other aspiring models in a small New York apartment. And things were going as well as they could, all things considered. Even though things were tough at times, Rebecca found a huge group of friends who were all in the same boat. It turns out she loved every second of living in New York, even the bad parts of living in such a huge town. Even though it was audition after audition, shoot after shoot, and then there was the waiting game, which was honestly the hardest part, Rebecca was living a very happy life, and she couldn't wait to bag that one role that would make her a star. The only problem was, she could have never guessed that after landing that major role, her life would be stolen away from her. Moving to New York was a launch pad for Rebecca's acting career, because in late 1984, Rebecca played the role of Annie Barnes on ABC's show One Life to Live. But Rebecca wasn't serious about acting at the time, and she wanted to get her foot in the door of modeling. But that was easier said than done, because even though Rebecca was talented and beautiful, she was lacking in height. Now, Rebecca stood at 5'7" tall, but because they deemed her too short, she wasn't able to book many modeling gigs. I mean, 5'7" seems like a pretty reasonable size to me. I mean, heck, that's 3 inches taller than I am, but I guess modeling is a strange business, and she was rejected from gig after gig. Feeling let down, not getting her dream job, Rebecca made another decision, and that was to move to Japan in 1985. A little less than a year after her work on One Life to Live. She was hopeful that she would land modeling contracts in Japan, but that didn't happen either, and this was when an epiphany hit her. Rebecca enjoyed acting, and due to not getting into modeling for reasons beyond her control, Rebecca decided to leave her dream of modeling behind and focus solely on acting. Rebecca loved acting and performing. She was made for putting on a show. She had it in her blood since she was born, putting on performances and shows for her family and friends, making everyone laugh, so Rebecca had made up her mind, and she was going to move back to New York and focus on becoming an actress. This was when her career really began to pick up the pace, and it was also when people started to take notice of her. But for some of those people, they were noticing her for all the wrong reasons. Upon moving back to New York City in 1986, Rebecca did manage to land a few roles, but she was still struggling immensely. She ended up working as a waitress while she did her best to land some new roles, and it's safe to say her acting journey was quite difficult, but she never let her fears or worries get the best of her. And soon enough, it was time for that fateful photo shoot that would change her life forever. Almost as if it came completely out of nowhere, Rebecca was asked to appear on the cover of 17 magazine, which for Rebecca and other girls her age from Oregon was like landing on the cover of Vogue. It was a huge deal, and it was this very front cover that caught the eyes of television producers. After this photo shoot, producers reached out to Rebecca's agency and called her in for an audition for My Sister Sam, a hit comedy series that was super popular at the time. This phone call was like a dream for Rebecca. She was extremely excited about the opportunity. She was auditioning for the role of Patty Russell, a teenage girl who moves to San Francisco to be with her older sister after their parents pass away. Basically, Rebecca was going to play the role of Pam's younger sister, with Pam being one of the main characters in the series. Rebecca went to the audition and she gave it her best, and she was waiting for the good news for days, and finally, one day her efforts paid off. Rebecca scored Patty's role, and the rest was history. My Sister Sam was a hit, and it was ranked in the top 25 sitcoms of all time. After this series eventually ran its course, though, Rebecca was soon asked to perform in various other movies, and within a very small amount of time, she had made a huge name for herself. But the thing that most people never consider when they have dreams to be models, actors, influencers, or whatever it may be, the thing they don't consider is that, yes, you end up with tons of fans singing your praises, but you also end up with fans who want a little more from you than you can realistically offer. Dedicated fans are great. They're what keep the machine turning, and they're what keep your spirits up when you start to doubt yourself. But some fans can be a bit too dedicated. They want all of your attention no matter what. And some of them, well, they're willing to kill just to get that attention. Rebecca used to get a lot of fan mail and letters. 90% of them were very supportive and kind, but some of them were pretty unsettling. Now, this was the 1980s, so obviously there was no Instagram, Facebook, or social media sites where people could find celebrities and follow them, comment on their pictures, and do all that kind of stuff. At the time, fan mail, letters, and posters were all the rage. If you were a fan of a band, an actor or an actress, or even a reality TV celebrity, then your room would be covered with posters, merchandise, and other knickknacks. Fans would also write to their favorite actors and celebrities, and if they were lucky, maybe they'd get a reply back from them. So this was exactly what one fan did. He wrote letters to Rebecca, but they weren't threatening or anything. They genuinely looked like letters from an adoring fan. He would go on and on about how Rebecca was so talented, beautiful, and amazing, and how he watched every single one of her movies and shows. Typical fan stuff. It was a very innocent letter that screamed nothing but, "I'm a huge fan of yours." But little did Rebecca know that something else was simmering underneath this seemingly normal fan behavior. Turns out, these letters were from a young man named Robert John Bardo. Robert was the youngest of 7 children, but his life from the get-go was anything but perfect. His dad was a raging alcoholic and very abusive towards his wife and kids. Robert belonged to a pretty dysfunctional family, and he was subjected to abuse by his siblings, parents, you name it. Naturally, seeing their dad, some of the kids also turned violent from a young age. But not Robert. If anything, he was just on the receiving end of this abuse. He was constantly belittled by his siblings, and he was basically just their punching bag. This led Robert to be put in a foster home when he became unstable and threatened to harm himself after suffering the constant abuse at the hands of his own family. Sources said that Robert's family was pathological and volatile. It was a very unstable household and not nurturing at all for any one of the children. But since Robert was the youngest, he eventually became the pushover of the family. If anyone wanted to take their anger or edge off, Robert would be their target. This is why Robert grew up to be very, quote, emotionally handicapped, as one source labeled him. And he just couldn't get a grip on his pent-up frustration, which is heartbreaking to hear. Soon, the parasite of dysfunction had latched onto Robert too, and when he reached adolescence, he also became very violent and angry. A typical case of generational trauma, where a parent experienced trauma at some point, so they pass off that trauma secondhand to their children, and then their children do the same, so on and so forth. Robert was unfortunately caught in this exact same cycle that so many of us find ourselves in. Now these days, this cycle is breakable with determination and therapy. It's certainly easier said than done, but help is basically around every corner these days. But Robert didn't have that luxury. He didn't get any help for his underlying mental health issues because, well, it was the 1970s and 80s. People weren't educated about mental health and the importance of getting help as they are now. Back in the day, if someone was mentally challenged or struggling, then they were basically left to deal with it on their own more often than not. No one really tried to help them. Sure, there were doctors around who'd throw some pills at the situation, but we just didn't have the proper knowledge or education back then to know what to do with people with mental illness. It was as if being mentally ill was a contagious disease and a kick to people's reputations. They were more hush-hush about it than anything, and that's just devastating. Robert's family also had a history of these mental health issues, and soon after all this came to light, Robert was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. With so many obvious struggles in his life, it shouldn't come as a shock that he had several run-ins with the law, and he was arrested 3 times for charges relating to violence, disorderly conduct, and being publicly inappropriate, and several other offenses too. We don't know the details, but it is still chilling to know that he was just a teenager when he was out terrorizing people and threatening them. Even Robert's neighbors were terrified of him because his attitude reeked of bitterness. It also came as no surprise that Robert was institutionalized when he was 15, and after getting released, he dropped out of high school even though he was a pretty good student. When he was in school, he would ace all of his classes and was a legitimate straight A student for most of his life. Now, he worked several odd jobs at this point to make ends meet, and at one point, he even worked as a janitor as well as a cook at a Jack in the Box restaurant. Even though he was smart, Robert was still a dropout at the end of the day, so these jobs were basically all he could get. At the time, no one else would hire him. Well, around the same time, when he was working as a janitor, Robert developed a fixation with someone famous. She was a child actress and a peace activist named Samantha Smith. Samantha was only 10 years old when she wrote a letter to the newly appointed General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Yuri Andropov. And in that letter, she pinned her distaste for wars and pleaded with everyone to make peace. Her contributions to the anti-war protests of the Cold War led to her popularity, and she was given a bunch of titles, such as America's Youngest Ambassador. Her popularity led her to pursue acting as well as peace activities in Japan. She starred in a Disney Channel special titled Samantha Smith Goes to Washington, and she even starred in a television series called Lime Street. All that to say, she was quite famous. I mean, her letter to General Secretary Yuri was published in the Soviet state-run newspaper Pravda, and her peace activities were front-page news in every newspaper. It caught a lot of attention, including that of Robert Bardo, who became obsessed with her. Now, Robert was in Tucson, Arizona, and Samantha was in Maine, but Robert's obsession led him to travel to Maine in hopes of meeting Samantha. But he was unsuccessful after he was given a citation by the police. Well, undeterred by this, he resorted to writing letters to Samantha, and although we don't know what was written in the letters and if they ever reached Samantha or not, it's still disturbing to think that Robert was so fixated on a 13-year-old girl, especially considering he was now legally an adult. Well, his obsession only died when Samantha tragically did as well. On August 25th of 1985, Samantha and her dad were aboard a Beechcraft 99 aircraft when it crashed while landing, colliding into some trees. And that crash resulted in all of the passengers and crew losing their lives, including Samantha and her dad. Hearing this news, Robert was deeply saddened, but that also meant he had no one to obsess over anymore. And that was when his attention diverted to none other than Rebecca Schaeffer. Robert was 19 at the time when he started writing letters to Rebecca. And I know what you're thinking. His letters were likely creepy, disturbing, provocative, and gross. But that wasn't the case. His letters were actually very appreciative, and nothing stood out that made Rebecca feel uncomfortable. If anything, it was uplifting, and Robert only raved about her like any ordinary fan would. So Rebecca wrote him back, telling him that his letter was one of the nicest she'd ever received. But that was a mistake. What Rebecca didn't suspect was that Robert John Bardo would become obsessed with her after this reply, and things wouldn't end well. Because some people can exploit kindness, take it the wrong way, and think it's their birthright to be appreciated by the people they're a fan of. And this isn't the case at all. Truth be told, Rebecca only wrote back to be nice. In reality, she'd probably said the exact same thing to tons of her fans in the past, but Robert couldn't see this. He felt that in some way, Rebecca was interested in continuing contact with him, either to be long-term friends or even life partners. He didn't know. But he did know that he wanted Rebecca, and he wanted her now more than ever, and he was determined if he couldn't have her, no one else could either. Rebecca unknowingly caught the attention of Robert with her reply to him, and he picked things up with Rebecca right where he left off with Samantha. He would watch all of Rebecca's movies and TV shows over and over. He was essentially a super fan, which there's nothing wrong with, but the next few things might make you feel weird. This time around, Robert thought that it was a good idea to visit the place where Rebecca worked. It was a Warner Bros. Lot in Burbank, Los Angeles. Robert somehow found out where Rebecca worked, and this was around the same time when she was working on the set of My Sister Sam. Now, I don't know how Robert's thought process worked, but he literally thought he could just walk into Warner Bros. Like it was a hotel or something and ask for Rebecca. and she would magically drop everything and meet him and hang out. I don't know if Robert was truly just blind to how this job works, or if this was something that tied him with his mental illness, but clearly, whatever it was, Robert just didn't get it. Well, before Robert could even step foot inside the building, he was stopped by security. According to security, Robert had a teddy bear and flowers for Rebecca, and he just wanted to give them to her and maybe talk to her for 5 minutes. But obviously that didn't happen, because he was escorted out of the lot. He was asked to leave, and he did, thankfully. Now, Warner Bros. Had a policy that actors and actresses were not informed of such unwanted visitors, so as not to unsettle the actors or hinder their work. So Rebecca wasn't even aware that on the other side of the door, her mystery pen pal was stopped by security. Now, calling Robert Rebecca's pen pal is a stretch, because they literally exchanged letters one time. But Robert might as well have thought that the two had been talking for years. In his mind, it was Rebecca's duty as a celebrity to drop everything and meet her fan who'd come all the way from Tucson. But not getting to meet Rebecca didn't stop him from visiting that same place again. See, even though Robert didn't get to meet Rebecca the first time around as he had hoped, he was hell-bent on seeing her in person, and he was willing to do anything to make sure that would happen. So when he came back next time, he brought a weapon. Things escalated pretty quickly with Robert. After getting turned away the first time, he came back again, and this time he was armed. But fortunately, Robert was still not allowed to go in this time either, and he was asked to leave again. Thankfully, he left yet again without a fight. One thing about Robert was that he never put up a fight. If he went to meet the objects of his obsession and was stopped by security, he wouldn't try to barge in or make a scene. He would just remain calm, cool, collected, and he'd leave without an ounce of confrontation. This is really weird and unsettling at the same time, because you often hear about stalkers, and they're often very persistent, and they pull off every trick in the book to get their point across. But that wasn't the case with Robert. If anything, he was compliant with security, and maybe that was the reason why he never really got into any trouble here, nor did the security think of 19-year-old Robert as a threat. Warner Bros. Security genuinely perceived Robert as a harmless, lovesick fan who just wanted to see his favorite celebrity in the flesh just once. But the thing is, many people have been hypercritical of Warner Bros. Security, claiming they should have done something to stop this guy when he kept coming back, begging to meet Rebecca. But the thing is, I'm not sure they really knew how dangerous this guy truly was. I mean, yeah, he had a weapon, but from what I've gathered, it's not like he charged in the front door waving a knife around for the world to see. Truth be told, they probably didn't even recognize him from any other fan, and may not have even noticed that this same guy had shown up twice. He looked like just about any other fan who'd ever walked through that door. I certainly understand the frustration with security, and it would have been great if they'd done something, but they truly seem like they didn't know. It's even more scary to think that Rebecca didn't know that Robert, the same fan who wrote her that heartfelt letter, was outside her workplace with a weapon. Rebecca didn't even realize that she could have been in grave danger if she were to have crossed paths with Robert that day. But another thing Rebecca didn't know was how fast Robert was derailing. He was slowly becoming more persistent and more aggressive. And just because Rebecca didn't know anything about it, doesn't mean that Robert was any less of a danger to her. It just took one wrong tick and everything came crashing down. But before it could escalate to the events that led us here, something very unexpected happened, which you normally don't hear about in cases like this. There came a point when Robert's obsession with Rebecca also ran its course, and he just wasn't fixated on her anymore. Why? Well, that was because he'd found other targets. They always do. Now that Robert had seen the world of acting and music, he saw many women that he could grow fond of. Those women even included the likes of Madonna. Now, we don't know the full extent of Robert stalking other celebrities. I'm assuming that he tried to go where these celebrities lived, and when he wasn't able to get in, obviously because of security, well, he resorted to writing letters, watching their movies, listening to their music, and trying to make plans to meet the women again. But for Robert, this whole thing seemed to have been a rinse and repeat cycle. This guy was just a serial stalker, or at the least, he tried to be, because he wasn't successful in reaching any of these women or terrorizing them with his antics. But before long, Robert bounced back to Rebecca, and this time, the obsession reached new heights. It all began when he watched Rebecca's latest movie. Something you should know about Robert, and why he was obsessed with Rebecca, is that he was drawn to her innocent nature, and he genuinely grew infatuated with her. To be frank, Rebecca was always complimented by fellow actors, movie producers, and her mentors, saying that she had a very refreshing, innocent air about her. And that's exactly what caught Robert's attention too. But this time around, Robert's obsession would reach newer and more furious heights. Robert watched her 1989 film, Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills. And in that movie, Rebecca played a supporting role. But when Robert reached a particular scene in which Rebecca was seen getting cozy with a fellow actor, it was as if a switch just flipped in his brain. The scene was pretty tame, but for Robert, this scene shattered the innocent image he had of Rebecca. And after this, he wasn't the same anymore. His infatuation with Rebecca took a very sour turn, and he called her extremely derogatory names. It was at this point that it was clear to see Robert had lost touch with reality entirely. He could no longer differentiate between the person and the character they play on screen, and he saw Rebecca as his own property. And now, in his eyes, she was essentially cheating on him. Well, around this same time, Rebecca moved out of her dauber home and got her own apartment in West Hollywood. She lived in a safe neighborhood surrounded by other apartment complexes and houses where a lot of other famous people lived. It was Rebecca's first time living alone, but she felt that it was safer since she lived in an apartment complex instead of a house. And no one like nosy reporters or paparazzi could come find out Rebecca's apartment number. Well, after her work on My Sister Sam, Rebecca was approached with an offer that made her see stars. She was asked to audition for the role of Mary Corleone in The Godfather 3, which was scheduled to be released in 1990. Now, The Godfather 3 was a pretty big deal for Rebecca. It was already a massive movie franchise, and the cast was star-studded. Every big name you could think of was in the Godfather movies, and now Rebecca's name was going to be on that list too. She was due to receive the script of the movie via courier in July of 1989, and she was basically bouncing off the walls to get her hands on this script. She was looking forward to it because, in her mind, if she got that role, it would be the final move to launch her into international stardom. She was expected to meet up with the director that same day when she received the script, so that they could go over all the details for her role. But that wouldn't happen, because Rebecca would never get that script, because the very day she was supposed to receive it, her career would be unexpectedly cut short. Robert was determined to find Rebecca and make her pay for what she had done to him, at least in his eyes. Cozying up next to another star in a fictional movie? In Robert's mind, this was war. Robert pulled out all the stops to find Rebecca and give her a piece of his mind. And how did he do this? Well, he paid a detective agency in Tucson to find out Rebecca's home address in West London. Let that sink in. This guy paid the agency $250, and I wish I could say that he was scammed, but unfortunately, he wasn't. And that agency managed to dig into California's DMV records, and they found Rebecca's home address and handed it over to Robert. You heard that right. It is so terrifying that sensitive and confidential information like Rebecca's home address could be made public for a mere $250. It is just insane and terrifying to think that people can get that kind of information from anywhere. Well, immediately afterward, Robert, with the help of his brother, got his hands on a firearm. He hid the firearm in a shopping bag and tucked it away either in his luggage or his jacket, and he proceeded to board a Greyhound bus from Arizona to where Rebecca lived, West Hollywood. On the fateful day of July 18, 1989, Robert reached Los Angeles and asked neighbors around the area if Rebecca lived there. I'm genuinely surprised at how people didn't find this behavior suspicious. The guy was seriously just going door to door asking for Rebecca. From this fact alone, it seemed like the information Robert was given may have only led him to the apartment complex, and it seems like the detective agency didn't know her specific room number, but soon enough, he'd found it. When Robert reached Rebecca's specific building, he rang the doorbell in the lobby, and an excited Rebecca rushed down to the lobby on the ground floor because, if you remember, she was looking forward to getting that script delivered for her role in The Godfather 3. And she also had a meeting with the director right after getting the script, so when she heard the doorbell, she assumed it must have been either the delivery or the director. But Rebecca was taken aback when she saw a random young man standing there with no script in hand. Keep in mind, Rebecca had never seen Robert's face before, so she was obviously on the defensive. According to Robert, he showed Rebecca the letter and an autograph that she'd sent him in reply. And maybe that was the point when Rebecca realized this guy was a bit of a creep. I mean, sure, he was a fan, but he managed to find out where she lived, and now he was standing in front of her home, as if he'd done nothing wrong. Well, according to Robert, Rebecca greeted him nicely, but then sternly told him not to visit her again, and bid him farewell before leaving and going back up to her apartment. And you'll be surprised to hear that Robert actually just left. If you remember, Robert never put up a fight for anything. He just left when she asked him to. This guy, he went through all that trouble to find her home address, and after a brief meeting, which I'm assuming left Rebecca feeling very unsettled, he just left. But this was nowhere near the end. Robert went to a nearby diner where he had breakfast, and then an hour later, he was standing in front of Rebecca's building again. When he rang the bell and Rebecca came back to the lobby, Robert remembered that Rebecca had a cold look on her face, and naturally so. Robert remembered Rebecca asking him why he was at her house again and telling him to hurry up as she didn't have a lot of time. This was apparently what caused Robert to lose his cool. In his words, he thought that it was a, quote, callous thing to say to a fan. This was Robert's point of no return. Heartbroken by Rebecca's lack of interest, Robert pulled the weapon from the shopping bag and fired at Rebecca at point-blank range, hitting her in the chest with one single round. This was the moment when the neighbors heard the commotion and came out to see what was going on, only to find Rebecca lying on the ground. All she could get out was, "Why?" before Robert turned around and ran off. But not before Rebecca's neighbor spotted him. That man in that yellow shirt that the neighbor saw running away from a collapsed Rebecca, that was Robert John Brando. He'd fatally attacked Rebecca, and whether he knew it or not, she tragically lost her life within 30 minutes of that attack. Rebecca, a hardworking and humble actress on the brink of her successful career, had her life taken from her, all because she refused to appease a stalker. If Robert thought that he would get away with murdering Rebecca, he was wrong. Because within one single day of Rebecca's attack and tragic passing, he was arrested in Tucson. How? Well, he was reported by several people for running aimlessly through traffic on Interstate 10, and people found him crouched over the hood of a random car, bawling his eyes out. Investigators assumed that Robert was contemplating ending his own life by running straight into oncoming traffic, but luckily he was unsuccessful. He was taken into custody, and almost instantly, he confessed to murdering 21-year-old Rebecca Schaeffer. But even though he confessed to the crime, he ended up pleading not guilty to all the charges, and now he was awaiting trial. Robert's defense decided to use his mental illness to get him out of prison. They claimed that he was not in the right state of mind when he murdered Rebecca, and because he suffered from bipolar disorder as well as schizophrenia, he wasn't aware of his actions. Now, this was the real challenge for the prosecution. They had to prove that Robert had planned it all and convinced the jury that he was an obsessed man going after a celebrity, because from the looks of it, the defense was going to go for the insanity plea, and things were looking up for Robert. He had bipolar disorder. He belonged to a dysfunctional family. All the defense had to do was sway the jury in the right direction, and boom, case won. But little did anyone know, the prosecution had some cold, hard evidence against this man. Robert was fully aware of his actions, we know this, and he intended to end Rebecca's life when he walked out of his home in Tucson, Arizona that day. He already had a firearm in his shopping bag. If Rebecca's murder was a last-minute plan, as Robert's defense claimed it was, why would he have brought this weapon with him and hidden it in a bag? Robert knew that he had to murder Rebecca for whatever reason. That's why he went through the trouble of going to a private detectives agency and paying them to find Rebecca's address. He went door to door in a West Hollywood apartment complex and asked people if Rebecca actually lived there. Rebecca did nothing that could explain why Robert went off his rocker, aside from being creeped out, which is a pretty normal reaction. Worse yet, Robert was carrying a copy of The Catcher in the Rye when he murdered Rebecca, and he dumped the book near her home on a rooftop as he fled the scene. This alone caused a lot of people to connect Robert's actions to those of Mark David Chapman, who carried the same book when he murdered John Lennon in 1980. Also, remember how Robert paid a detective agency to find Rebecca's home address? Well, it's believed this was influenced by Arthur Richard Jackson, who hired a private investigator to find an actress, Teresa Saldana's home, where he also attacked her ruthlessly. Also, he went back to Rebecca's home after having breakfast at a diner. He could have stopped right then and there if he wanted to, but he didn't. So Robert couldn't hide behind his mental illness forever. Or could he? In the end, Robert was thankfully found guilty of first-degree murder in the case of Rebecca Schaeffer, and he was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. As luck would have it, many years later, on July 27th of 2007, Robert was attacked on his way to breakfast in the maximum security unit of Mule Creek State Prison. Prison guards found 2 inmate-crafted weapons at the scene, and Robert was treated at UC Davis Medical Center. Turns out he was attacked by another second-degree murder convict who was serving an 82-year to life sentence at Mule Creek State Prison. Thankfully, Robert made a full recovery so that he would still have to face the rest of his sentence. While in prison, an interview with Robert was actually videotaped, and he went into extreme detail about how he had murdered Rebecca. And there were a lot of strange details in Rebecca's murder that sounded eerily similar to a few other cases. It seems like, in some weird way, Rebecca's murder was inspired by several other high-profile cases. It starts with the private investigator that he hired to find Rebecca's home address from the California DMV records. When the investigators heard of this detail, it was oddly familiar to an incident that happened sometime before Rebecca's murder. It was an incident that involved stalking another celebrity. See, there was an actress named Teresa Saldana. She starred in the 1990 TV series The Commish, as well as films like Raging Bull and Defiance. Teresa caught the eye of a 46-year-old drifter, Arthur Richard Jackson, who was originally from Aberdeen, Scotland. He became obsessed with her, and soon his obsession took a dark turn. He wanted to hurt Teresa for whatever sick reason. There was really no logic here, he just wanted to do it. This man traveled from Scotland all the way to the United States just to attack Teresa, and not before he found out where she lived. See, Arthur actually also hired a private investigator who was somehow able to get a hold of Teresa's mom's home phone number. Arthur then proceeded to call Teresa's mom, claiming to be a famous filmmaker's assistant, and he asked for Teresa's home address, which her mom gave to him. I mean, she had no reason to suspect Arthur. He sounded very convincing. But then, on the morning of March 15th of 1982, Arthur stood in front of Teresa's West Hollywood apartment on the second floor, and when Teresa answered the door, Arthur launched a vicious and frenzied attack on her. Teresa was seriously injured, but was saved when a delivery driver intervened, subdued Arthur, and called the police. Arthur was arrested on the spot, and Teresa was rushed to the hospital with 10 serious wounds. Her injuries were so bad that she had to stay at the hospital for 4 months. But luckily, she managed to make a full recovery, but she was never really the same after this. This led Teresa to take part in anti-stalking movements, and she became a prominent figure as an activist. Meanwhile, Arthur was jailed for 14 years for the deadly assault on Teresa, and he even made threats to target her and the delivery guy from prison, which is just terrifying on a whole new level. Luckily, he was later extradited to the United Kingdom, where he would be tried for unrelated charges. And shortly after this, he passed away from heart failure. Teresa's attack took place almost 7 years before Rebecca's attack, but it seemed like Robert took notes from Arthur, because he also got his hands on Robert's home address through a private investigator firm, sometime before his evil plan was actually put into motion. Apparently, this was a thing. It's so scary to think that private investigative firms had the means to leak personal information like that. But that wasn't the only thing Robert was inspired by. If you remember, the police also found a red paperback copy of The Catcher in the Rye on a nearby rooftop where Rebecca was found. It was believed that Robert had tossed the book near the crime scene before he made a run for it. And now, this detail also rang a bell, because another person was seen carrying that same book when he also murdered someone. His name was Mark David Chapman, and he stalked and murdered the Beatles singer John Lennon. Mark was jealous of John's lavish lifestyle and had very strong opinions on some of his songs and political stances. He stalked John for a long time before finally putting his plan into action on December 8th of 1980. He was seen loitering around John's apartment in Dakota, on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, New York. The crazy thing is that Mark even interacted with John at one point. He approached John with a copy of his album and handed it over to him to sign. Witnesses claim that Mark didn't say a word to John, and a photographer even snapped a photo of the incident, John giving Mark an autograph on his album. He stuck around for some time though, and he followed John around. But a few hours later, that's when it all came crashing down. because when John and his wife Yoko reached their apartment in Dakota and made their way towards the entrance, Mark saw his chance. He pulled out a firearm that he had on him all this time, and the surrounding people heard 5 deafening banging sounds, and John dropped to the ground, and that was that. The similarities here are uncanny. While Robert may not have casually stuck around after Rebecca's murder, you can't help but notice several similarities here. And it really leaves you wondering, was Robert's fascination and murder of Rebecca an isolated thing, or was he inspired by other killers? The way I see it, the way he was so fascinated with several other actresses, well, it really makes you wonder, was the situation with Rebecca really a one-off incident, or was he stalking various celebrities just waiting for one of them to give him an opportunity to strike, so that he could in some way reenact the crimes of his idols, Mark Chapman and Arthur Jackson? Celebrities before Rebecca Schaeffer were also victims of stalkers, and they also lost their lives very tragically and needlessly. And in the end, Rebecca's murder led to a huge change in California law, as well as US law. Stalking officially became a crime. It also led to the passing of anti-stalking laws, which were originally drafted in 1990. Moreover, the Driver's Privacy Protection Act was also enacted in 1994, preventing DMVs from providing or releasing sensitive information, like residential addresses or other things, to anyone. Furthermore, victims could obtain a 10-year restraining order from a civil judge, which was far better than the measly 4-year stay-away order that stalkers couldn't even be deterred by. A specialized Los Angeles police unit was also established, whose job was to work with celebrity attorneys and prosecutors to ensure the safety of anyone and everyone in Hollywood. To keep things rolling, any attempts by the stalker that are considered harmless, like love letters, incessantly reaching out to celebrities, and more escalated attempts of threatening and kidnapping, well, they're to be taken seriously by the police every single time. Teresa Saldana, the same stalking victim Robert took inspiration from, was also one of the many people who lobbied for the anti-stalking law and the 1994 Driver's Privacy Protection Act, which were put into effect following Rebecca's murder. Rebecca's case truly changed Hollywood forever. Suddenly, celebrities were on edge and felt like prisoners who had to constantly look after themselves because no one knew when some deranged fan or obsessive stalker would strike. Robert Bardo is still in prison serving his sentence today, but one disturbing detail came to light, and that was that he spends his time in a cell drawing pictures of celebrities. One of his drawings was of Rebecca Schaeffer. He also drew Angelina Jolie, Michael Jackson, and Taylor Swift, as well as notorious serial killers like David Berkowitz and John Wayne Gacy. This alone seems to kind of prove the hypothesis that this wasn't some one-off obsession. Robert was determined he was going to kill someone and live on in infamy, just like his idols, who were also murderers. Believe it or not, Robert's portraits are actually for sale online, priced from $25 to $100. In a prison interview, Robert addressed Rebecca and how he felt about her, and he said, "My feelings for her were uncontrollable. I was a fan of hers, and I may have carried it too far." The fact that he included that phrase, "may have," proves that even after all this time, Robert hasn't changed. And speaking of his words, after his arrest, Robert wrote a letter to his sister in Tennessee, in which he said, "I have an obsession with the unattainable." This is terrifying to decode, especially if you think about it in hindsight. For Robert, it seems like his sick and twisted obsession with Rebecca didn't die with her, as was the case with Samantha Smith. At the time of her passing, Rebecca was dating movie and television director Brad Silberling. He's known for directing movies like Casper, City of Angels, and Land of the Lost. In 2002, he went on to dedicate a film in remembrance of Rebecca, which was titled Moonlight Mile. The film follows the story of a man whose fiancée is murdered and how he battles with his grief and pain over her loss. In Rebecca's honor and to commemorate her work and success in My Sister Sam, Pam Dauber and other co-stars, Joel Brooks, David Knofton, and Jenny O'Hara, filmed a public service announcement for the Center to Prevent Handgun Violence. Rebecca Schaeffer's murder turned Hollywood upside down. And even though it led to a monumental change in the law, finally taking stalking seriously, that didn't mean that incidents like these stopped happening. In 1995, famous singer Selena was murdered by her fan club president. Later, Icelandic singer Björk was stalked and terrorized by a deranged fan who ended up taking his own life on camera in 1996. Christina Grimmie was one of the most recent cases, an innocent Christian woman who was just playing a show for fans, murdered by a stalker who also ended his own life in 2016. The scary truth is, even normal people like you and me are not safe from this fatal fixation. I mean, my wife had a stalker just last year, texting her all hours of the day, leaving creepy voicemails at 4 a.m. None of us are immune. It is seriously so alarming and scary that we don't know and can't ever truly know the people we interact with or even meet in person. If you've watched this channel for any length of time, you'll know sometimes even our closest friends aren't safe people to be around. All it takes is a moment, a decision, and an infatuation or fondness can morph into obsessive hatred and something far uglier that leaves nothing but pain in its wake. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Johan Blignot and GWR283. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public. And it is a great way to support the channel and help out. I appreciate all of you guys that have decided to do that. If you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video or find a link down in the description. And don't forget, True Crime Stories t-shirts are also now available. You can grab one of those from a link down in the description as well. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered. And don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.